Good morning. Today is the 16th of Kislev, the 29th of November. We're continuing with Mitzvat Tzitzitis on page 30, one-third down. We'll just say again what we said yesterday. ולזה היה ירידת הנפש בגוף לקיים תורה ומצוות, שעל ידי זה נמשך גילוי אלוקותו יתברך משתי בחינות הנ"ל. So the soul wants to be embodied in order to be able to draw from both channels of divine revelation. They're called sovev u'memale, as we said, the encompassing and the filling light, or the encompassing and the integrated light. כי גם הסובב אף על פי שהוא מקיף ונאמר, עם כל זה על ידי המצוות יכול להיות נמשך. Because the benefit of having a body is that you can perform mitzvos, you can perform commandments, and the commandments draw from the encompassing light. They are God's will, whereas the soul until now has only perceived God in the form of understanding God, but not in performing His will. The will is higher than what He is. The Torah, the understanding, the teaching, comes out of chokhmah, out of wisdom. And wisdom and understanding and everything that's intellectual, everything that's in the intellectual faculties, the Chabad, is inner light. It's light that's integrated. As we said yesterday, if you don't understand it, you haven't done anything. You have to, and this is also, by the way, true, we didn't mention this yesterday, in terms of halacha. If a person is studying something and he doesn't understand what he's studying, he's not performing the mitzvah of learning Torah. This is for you, by the way. He doesn't perform the mitzvah of studying Torah. The only time he can do that is if he's reading verses from the scripture. Verses from scripture, even if he doesn't understand what they mean, he's yotze the mitzvah, meaning he's performed the mitzvah because they don't require understanding. That's the big difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah. The written Torah only has to be seen. You just have to see the words and say them. Even if you say them incorrectly a little, it's okay. But you have to say them. You can't just scan or something like that. And the oral Torah has to be understood. If you don't understand it, you didn't perform the mitzvah. So somebody sits in front of a Shulchan Aruch, and he just reads the words and he doesn't understand what he's saying. All the more so that he doesn't understand what mitzvah it's talking about. He doesn't get it. So he hasn't.
We'll never understand it.
At least that he understands what it's talking about. At least he understands the words. He understands what they mean. Of course, if you're reading a Tosfot, right, and a gloss of the Tosafot on something in the Gemara, and you don't understand the Gemara, so certainly you don't understand the Tosafot, and it's empty words. It's called Dvarim B'Teilim. Okay, so the Torah is inner light. It has to be understood. But the mitzvot, but the mitzvot, they come from God's will. That's what He wants. And the will is from the crown. It's not from the intellect. And the will is higher in that sense. Because this is what we call the simple will, what God wants from the worlds. So what God wants is sort of like, do as I told you, and don't try to think through it and try to trick me or something like that. When I tell you to do something, do it. Why? Because it comes from a higher place. This is what I want. And then if I want to explain exactly what it is and so on, that's lower. That's like a... As we said, inner light, that is the secret of what it means, Gan Eden, Garden of Eden. And that's what Adam was, that was the level at which Adam's consciousness was when he was created. He was in a state of being in what we call understanding, but there was no yet, shouldn't have introduced Adam here. This is what we mean when we say that the soul goes in the afterlife to the Garden of Eden, to paradise. It means that it's going up to understand, to intellectually better its understanding of everything in the Torah. That's what the Garden of Eden is. But the encompassing light, will only happen in the future. Meaning we do mitzvot now, but we don't see, that's what we discussed yesterday, we don't see the encompassing light that is accompanied with that mitzvah. As opposed to when we learn Torah, we certainly experience the inner light because that is understanding. And we said yesterday, if you understand what the Torah says, it doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. You have the inner light inside you. And the encompassing light will only be revealed, Sheichyu Amitim. And that is called the resurrection of the dead. Why do we call it the resurrection of the dead? We didn't explain this yesterday. Because this looks dead to us now. Even putting on tefillin looks dead to us. Why does it look dead? Because there's no experience. It's like you're looking at a body. The body's there. You're doing the mitzvah, but there's no life force inside. You don't feel anything. There's no experience. You can subjectively say that you feel, but there's no objective. There's nothing going on. Nothing happens to my hand. So it looks dead, and we call that the resurrection of the dead. And so now people will come and say, so does that mean that there won't be resurrection of the dead, like people coming out of their graves? We'll leave that for another time. It's a different discussion. But resurrection of the dead is called that because it's an image, and the image means that everything that I did, right, everything I did in my lifetime, all the mitzvot that I did in my lifetime, I didn't see the encompassing light that came with them. Now I will see it. Now will become evident.
There's a halacha.
Yeah.
It says that if you do a mitzvah, and then afterwards you regret that you did it, then it's either that you didn't do the mitzvah. Therefore, if you're learning Torah, but you don't believe in Torah, you're learning it in order to be able to argue with the Charedim, or to make fun of the Charedim. So you're not learning Torah.
It's not a mitzvah.
So therefore they should
That's not the mitzvah, but you're still getting the inner light.
But how can you?
Because you understood it.
You're denying it.
Because you understood it. If you understand it, you have the inner light already. The mitzvah, you're right, the mitzvah doesn't count. Why? Because you didn't do it, because Hashem told you to. You did it because you wanted to argue with something, or you wanted to prove that it's wrong, or whatever it is. But you have to understand it in order to be able to do those things. So if you understood it, it's already inside you.
The inner light is neutral. It's how we use it, correct? In other words,
no, it's not
it
neutral.
comes into a kofer. He's reading.
No, this
he
is neutral.
understands
The mitzvah is neutral. The mitzvah is neutral in the sense that it only requires me to have intent that I want to perform God's will. That's all I need. The inner light is very, very loaded. It's loaded with my feelings, because a person who comes with an open mind and understands something is very different than a person who comes and says every word that's here is wrong. But still, if he wants to understand, he's still going to have to understand. He's going to have to open his mind at some level. And that's when the inner light enters. It's not neutral. It depends on the person. It's very dependent on us.
But so it is. In other words, the inner light. But the inner light I get, I'm a believer.
Right.
You know, okay, is different than what a kofer gets. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, of course it's different, because
But the inner light is the inner light.
by definition, inner light depends on the vessel.
Okay. Now
So
we
whatever
define
type of vessel it is.
Very good.
For instance, if I learn the sugya and the Gemara, and the Rashba learns the sugya and the Gemara, the inner light that we're going to get is completely different, because my mind is very limited.
It's a kli. It's
Yeah,
the
my
kli.
vessel is very
good,
small.
very good.
His vessel is huge.
I understand.
By the way, it's very interesting that we usually say that the Rishonim, the early commentators, their heart was less open than ours. But that's a topic for another discussion. Why is it that the heart has to be open a little, not a lot? In any case. So what I was saying was, he doesn't have a mitzvah because he doesn't want to learn Torah. What he's trying to do is he's trying to argue against. But the inner light comes in. Otherwise, how's he going to argue if he doesn't understand it? He has to understand it. So you can say he understands it, he twists all of it. So even to twist it, you first have to get it. You can't get it in, you can't do anything with it until you understand what it says. And then if he doesn't understand, so of course he doesn't have anything. So if he goes up against even a child, so he'll tell him, you didn't understand the words, you don't even understand what you're saying. So there's no inner light there, you're right. But the mitzvah he doesn't have, because he's not studying in order to perform the mitzvah.
There is inner light.
But the inner light goes in because, again, if he understands there's inner light. Because that's what integrated light means intellectual. It has to be experienced.
Even if he understands it in a crude way. That's where I'm...
No.
See, then you're saying the kofar doesn't get then.
Who said he doesn't understand it correctly? He twists it afterwards. He understands it and he goes against him. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a very simple example. There's twice that God talks to Noach. In the beginning of Parshat Noah, he talks to him twice. One time it says, Vayomer Elokim el Noach. It says, Elokim said to Noach. The second time it says, Havaya said to Noach. The first time he only tells him to take 2 out of each, a pair of animals from each species. The second time he tells him a pair of animals from each species and 7 from all of those that are kosher. Okay, so the kofar, he reads this, he understands. First he said 2, then he said 2 and 7. That's understanding. If you don't understand those words, now the kofar will come and say, what does this mean? It means so and so. Okay, if it means so and so, I understand. So, the problem is that the conclusion that he takes out of it is wrong. But he already has the Torah inside. In other words, he's thinking about Torah all day long. And what the sages say is, the Torah itself is going to slowly turn him around. Okay. Now we're up to, and so we said that the inner light is what we call God's limited aspect. It's a revelation of God's limited aspect. And when there's resurrection of the dead, then our eyes, our physical eyes, will be able to see. Physical eyes, I don't know, but our eyes will be able to see His unlimited, His limitless aspect, hamakifanat, which is what we call encompassing light. And this is described in the Navi, in Isaiah 30, verse 20. Your teacher will no longer be hidden. What do we mean by your teacher will no longer be hidden? We mean that God, as the giver of the Torah, will no longer be hidden. There are many words for teacher in Hebrew. This one means morecha. More, like ilchot mamrim, means someone who gives instruction. It doesn't mean someone who explains. Specifically, he who gave you the instructions, he who gave you the commandments, will be revealed. And what we mean by that is God's encompassing light, His unlimited aspect will be revealed. Okay, now we have a section that's going to explain to us some things about how we learn Torah now. And this is needed because now he's slowly inching towards explaining the concepts of tzitzit. I want us to for a moment to recall what we're even talking about. Why are we doing all this? Because the tzitzit has 2 parts to it. Think about the talis. Think about the tzitzit. What you have is you have a garment with which you wrap yourself. And then you have strings that are attached to this garment. So right away, I'm doing this because otherwise we're going to, it's going to take us another 2 days to get to the tzitzit, and we're going to forget entirely about what we were talking about. The garment is like encompassing light. To understand the meaning of the garment, we had to first of all understand what the encompassing light is. So now we have, that's what the garment symbolizes. The strings, remember we said a number of times that the inner light is like a thread and a line. The strings represent the inner light. Okay? That's just a primer, so that we don't get lost. Now let's continue. He's going to now push us in that direction, and he's going to look at a mitzvah that later he explains in much more depth, but he is just going to touch upon it. Tzaras, what they call leprosy. Okay? And what's special about tzaras, and it's very interesting, is it's one of the few places that the sages told us what's happening behind the scenes. What do we mean by behind the scenes? There's a Gemara in Baba Metzia that Rav Nachman, he's called, Rabbah, he's standing on the shores. He was running away, I believe, at the time from some persecution there in Babylon or Persia, wherever they were. And they were Persian, I think they were persecuting at the time. And he's running away, and then he hears, it's like suddenly he has a vision, or he hears what's going on in Gan Eden. He hears what's going on. We said, what do they do in Gan Eden? What do they do in paradise? They learn Torah, as it were. Meaning, they don't learn, there's no books, but they're basking in the divine presence. And what they mean by basking in the divine presence means that they are comprehending, they're understanding more and more of what the Torah was talking about. But they understand it in a spiritual way, because you can't talk in paradise when you don't have a body. You can't discuss leprosy as some affliction of the skin. It doesn't mean anything there. So they have to talk about it in some way, and he hears it translated into the language of the mundane, of him. And so this becomes one of the few sections in the Talmud that we get a glimpse of what it looks like when somebody has a vision above, and what he sees. So let's hear. Like we said, the main thing they do in paradise is study Torah. As the sages say, and this is what Rabbah heard, Safek. He heard that there is a dispute in the heavenly academy, they call it. Metifta derikia. Im baheret kodem lesear lavan. Does baheret, the baheret is the white skin. Does it have to come before the white hair? Which the white hair is really, both of them together you need them for a sign that the person has leprosy. But does it have to be in this order? The first there was white skin, and then the hair turned white. Apparently that's one of the symptoms of this disease. And they ask, Man nochach? So he says, who's here that can tell us which it is? Is it dependent on the order or not dependent on the order? And they say, Nochach Rabba bar Nachmani. And they say, Rabba bar Nachmani is here. Look, he just came up from, and he below, he knows these things very well. So let's ask him. Meaning his soul has just arrived. Somebody might say that maybe he had, from fear, from being persecuted, whatever, maybe his soul left for a while. It could be all kinds of things. But his soul is here, let's ask him. Let's see what happens. So says the Tzemach Tzedek. So this is a story. It goes on a little bit, and then there's a discussion, and then God interferes. It's very interesting, the whole discussion there. Baba Metzia 86. It certainly can't be that they're discussing in the skin itself, is it this way or that way? Because they have no skin, and there's only souls. They don't have a body. So how are they even learning this? It can't be that they're learning it with physical language. They're not using physical language. In the same way that when we read this story, and Rabba bar Nachmani says, I went up, he didn't take a helicopter. He didn't go by helicopter. We understand that this is a state of mind. This is a level of consciousness that he reached. In the same way, they read the Torah, they don't understand it as physical. They understand its spiritual aspect. Sharein sham gashmiut, because there's no physicality there. Arba rashuyot l'Shabbat, or beheret v'se'ar lavan, there's no space so that you can talk about the four types of space on Shabbos, that there's personal space and public space. You can't discuss those things because there's no space there. Right? In spirituality, the big difference between spirituality and corporeality is the issue of extension, of space. In spirituality, there is no space. You can't talk about space. You have to talk about something else. So, but what is it talking about? It's talking about what we call the inner teachings of Torah. And this is a big important sentence here, because he's telling you, when we learn Pnimius Torah, when we call it Pnimius Torah, the inner teachings of the Torah, what do we mean? We mean stripping it of its corporeal leaning or words. Meaning we learn Torah, we look at what the Torah says, we look at Yaakov and Esav, but we don't look at Yaakov and Esav, the people. We know there were people like that, very nice. But when I want to learn Pnimius Torah, I have to treat Yaakov and Esav as archetypes, as representing something. That's what Pnimius Torah means. So there, in paradise, they learn Pnimius Torah. So now a person begins to understand, wait a minute, what are we doing here? We're learning Chasidus. Chasidus is called Pnimius Torah. It's called the inner teaching. So what are we learning? We're learning the way they're learning in paradise. That's what Chasidus is. Chasidus is taking from the Torah that was above and saying that a normal human being who's alive now, who has a body, who's going to live for X number of years, can study this type of teaching. He can strip it of its corporeal meaning. That is what the Zohar does. That's what the Medrash does in principle also. But the Zohar certainly, and everything after the Zohar is also the same way. רוצה לומר, סוד הבהרת ברוחניות. They're looking at what does the white skin mean in its spiritual sense. What does it mean in its spiritual sense? מניעת הרוחניות. מניעת השפע. It's a closing off, a closing off of the nurturing, of the sustaining light that God is giving. Baheret means when leprosy strikes, first of all, what it does, it closes off the skin. That's what it means that the skin became white. That there's no effluence coming out. The skin is supposed to be the last stage of effluence coming out of the person. What kind of effluence? What are we talking about? Again, that's spiritually. And when it turns white, it can't do that anymore. ושיער לבן היניקה לחיצונים. What do these hair follicles, what do they represent? This is going to be very important. Because anything that's like a hair, anything that's like a elongated, one-dimensional line, represents an ability to nurture. It takes the great light. For instance, if you drink with a straw, so you have something that you can't drink it all at once, so you want to drink it slowly. So it nurtures. Or think about a child who's suckling from his mother. He can't drink from a cup yet, he doesn't know how to, but to suck he knows. Why? Because it's easier. It's easier to swallow, everything's easier. It makes everything easier. So the hair follicles on the body, not these ones, they're whatever they are. But what this represents spiritually is the ability to suck a little bit of light out of the source. And so and specifically, this is what anything that's on the outside is using in order to suck from the inside. So you have to think about each hair like a little straw. That's what hairs represent. We're going to see that that's exactly what these are also. These are straws also, in a certain sense. We'll see this as we go on. Okay? So we have here that first the skin turned white, which prevents effluence from coming out. And then the hair follicle also turns white, which means that even through these straws, there's no ability to suck.
Doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay?
Wow.
So that's what it means in Pnimis. That's how you learn the sugya. That's how you begin. You have to unpack every symbol. What does it mean? What does the skin mean? What does the hair mean? What does each part mean? And that's where we're going to do the tzitzits also. We're going to look at the larger garment and say that means something, and we're going to look at each one of the strings and say that also represents something. So that is what's called Pnimius Torah. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow.